Book 5, Part 1 of Laws by Plato, translated by Benjamin Jowett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 5. Athenian. Listen, all ye who have just now heard the laws about gods and about our dear forefathers. Of all the things which a man has next to the gods, his soul is the most divine and most truly his own. Now, in every man there are two parts, the better and superior which rules, and the worse and inferior which serves, and the ruling part of him is always to be preferred to the subject. Wherefore I am right in bidding every one next to the gods, who are our masters, and those who in order follow them, that is, the demons, to honour his own soul, which every one seems to honour, but no one honours as he ought. For honour is a divine good, and no evil thing is honourable, and he who thinks that he can honour the soul by word or gift or any sort of compliance, without making her in any way better, seems to honour her, but honours her not at all. For example, every man from his very boyhood fancies that he is able to know everything, and thinks that he honours his soul by praising her, and he is very ready to let her do whatever she may like. But I mean to say that in acting thus he injures his soul, and is far from honouring her, whereas in our opinion he ought to honour her as second only to the gods. Again, when a man thinks that others are to be blamed and not himself for the errors which he has committed from time to time, and the many and great evils which befell him in consequence, and is always fancying himself to be exempt and innocent, he is under the idea that he is honouring his soul. Whereas the very reverse is the fact, for he is really injuring her, and when disregarding the word and approval of the legislator he indulges in pleasure, then again he is far from honouring her, he only dishonours her, and fills her full of evil and remorse. Or when he does not endure to the end the labours and fears and sorrows and pains which the legislator approves, but gives way before them, then by yielding he does not honour the soul, but by all such conduct he makes her to be dishonourable. Nor when he thinks that life at any price is a good does he honour her, but yet once more he dishonours her, for the soul having a notion that the world below is all evil, he yields to her, and does not resist and teach or convince her that for aught she knows the world of the gods below, instead of being evil, may be the greatest of all goods. Again, when any one prefers beauty to virtue, what is this but the real and utter dishonour of the soul? For such a preference implies that the body is more honourable than the soul, and this is false, for there is nothing of earthly birth which is more honourable than the heavenly, and he who thinks otherwise of the soul has no idea how greatly he undervalues this wonderful possession. Nor again, when a person is willing or not unwilling to acquire dishonest gains, does he then honour his soul with gifts. Far otherwise. He sells her glory and honour for a small piece of gold. But all the gold which is under or upon the earth is not enough to give in exchange for virtue. In a word, I may say that he who does not estimate the base and evil, the good and noble, according to the standard of the legislator, and abstain in every possible way from the one and practise the other to the utmost of his power, does not know that in all these respects he is most foully and disgracefully abusing his soul, which is the divinest part of man. For no one, as I may say, ever considers that which is declared to be the greatest penalty of evil doing, namely, to grow into the likeness of bad men, and growing like them to fly from the conversation of the good, and be cut off from them, and cleave to and follow after the company of the bad. And he who is joined to them must do and suffer what such men by nature do and say to one another, a suffering which is not justice but retribution. For justice and the just are noble, whereas retribution is the suffering which waits upon injustice. And whether a man escape or endure this, he is miserable; in the former case because he is not cured, while in the latter he perishes in order that the rest of mankind may be saved. Speaking generally, our glory is to follow the better and improve the inferior, which is susceptible of improvement, as far as this is possible. And of all human possessions, the soul is by nature most inclined to avoid the evil, and track out and find the chief good, which when a man has found, he should take up his abode with it during the remainder of his life. Wherefore the soul also is second or next to God in honour, and third, as every one will perceive, comes the honour of the body in natural order. Having determined this, we have next to consider that there is a natural honour of the body, and that of honours some are true and some are counterfeit. To decide which are which is the business of the legislator, and he, I suspect, would intimate that they are as follows. Honour is not to be given to the fair body, or to the strong, or the swift, or the tall, or to the healthy body, although many may think otherwise, any more than to their opposites. But the mean states of all these habits are by far the safest and most moderate, for the one extreme makes the soul braggart and insolent, and the other illiberal and base. And money and property and distinction all go to the same tune. The excess of any of these things is apt to be a source of hatreds and divisions among states and individuals, and the defect of them is commonly a cause of slavery. And therefore I would not have any one fond of heaping up riches for the sake of his children, in order that he may leave them as rich as possible, for the possession of great wealth is of no use, either to them or to the state. The condition of youth, which is free from flattery, and at the same time not in need of the necessaries of life, is the best and most harmonious of all, but being in accord and agreement with our nature, and making life to be most entirely free from sorrow. Let parents then bequeath to their children not a heap of riches, but the spirit of reverence. We indeed fancy that they will inherit reverence from us, if we rebuke them when they show a want of reverence; but this quality is not really imparted to them by the present style of admonition, which only tells them that the young ought always to be reverential. A sensible legislator will rather exhort the elders to reverence the younger, and above all to take heed that no young man sees or hears one of themselves doing or saying anything disgraceful. For where old men have no shame, there young men will most certainly be devoid of reverence. The best way of training the young is to train yourself at the same time, not to admonish them, but to be always carrying out your own admonitions in practice. He who honours his kindred and reveres those who share in the same gods and are of the same blood and family may fairly expect that the gods who preside over generation will be propitious to him, and will quicken his seed. And he who deems the services which his friends and acquaintances do for him greater and more important than they themselves deem them, and his own favours to them less than theirs to him, will have their good will in the intercourse of life. And surely in his relations to the state and his fellow citizens he is by far the best, who, rather than the Olympic or any other victory of peace or war, desires to win the palm of obedience to the laws of his country, and who of all mankind is the person reputed to have obeyed them best through life. In his relations to strangers, a man should consider that a contract is a most holy thing, and that all concerns and wrongs of strangers are more directly dependent on the protection of God than wrongs done to citizens. For the stranger, having no kindred and friends, is more to be pitied by gods and men. Wherefore also he who is most able to avenge him is most zealous in his cause, and he who is most able is the genius and the god of the stranger, who follow in the train of Zeus, the god of strangers. And for this reason he who has a spark of caution in him will do his best to pass through life without sinning against the stranger. And of offences committed, whether against strangers or fellow countrymen, that against suppliants is the greatest. For the god who witnessed to the agreement made with the suppliant becomes in a special manner the guardian of the sufferer, and he will certainly not suffer unavenged. Thus we have fairly described the manner in which a man is to act about his parents and himself and his own affairs, and in relation to the state and his friends and kindred, both in what concerns his own countrymen and in what concerns the stranger. We will now consider what manner of man he must be who would best pass through life in respect of those other things which are not matters of law, but of praise and blame only, in which praise and blame educate a man, and make him more tractable and amenable to the laws which are about to be imposed. Truth is the beginning of every good thing, both to gods and men, and he who would be blessed and happy should be from the first a partaker of the truth, that he may live a true man as long as possible, for then he can be trusted. But he is not to be trusted who loves voluntary falsehood, and he who loves involuntary falsehood is a fool. Neither condition is enviable, for the untrustworthy and ignorant has no friend, and as time advances he becomes known, and lays up in store for himself isolation in crabbed age, when life is on the wane, so that whether his children or friends are alive or not, he is equally solitary. Worthy of honour is he who does no injustice, and of more than twofold honour if he not only does no injustice himself, but hinders others from doing any. The first may count as one man, the second is worth many men, because he informs the rulers of the injustice of others. And yet more highly to be esteemed is he who co operates with the rulers in correcting the citizens as far as he can. He shall be proclaimed the great and perfect citizen, and bear away the palm of virtue. The same praise may be given about temperance and wisdom, and all other goods which may be imparted to others, as well as acquired by a man for himself. He who imparts them shall be honoured as the man of men, and he who is willing yet is not able may be allowed the second place. But he who is jealous and will not, if he can help, allow others to partake in a friendly way of any good is deserving of blame. The good, however, which he has is not to be undervalued by us because it is possessed by him, but must be acquired by us also to the utmost of our power. Let every man then freely strive for the prize of virtue, and let there be no envy, for the unenvious nature increases the greatness of states. He himself contends in the race, blasting the fair fame of no man, but the envious, who thinks that he ought to get the better by defaming others, is less energetic himself in the pursuit of true virtue, and reduces his rivals to despair by his unjust slanders of them. And so he makes the whole city to enter the arena untrained in the practice of virtue, and diminishes her glory as far as in him lies. Now every man should be valiant, but he should also be gentle. From the cruel, or hardly curable, or altogether incurable acts of injustice done to him by others, a man can only escape by fighting and defending himself and conquering, and by never ceasing to punish them. And no man who is not of a noble spirit is able to accomplish this. As to the actions of those who do evil, but whose evil is curable, in the first place, let us remember that the unjust man is not unjust of his own free will. For no man of his own free will would choose to possess the greatest of evils, and least of all in the most honourable part of himself. And the soul, as we said, is of a truth deemed by all men the most honourable. In the soul, then, which is the most honourable part of him, no one, if he could help, would admit or allow to continue the greatest of evils. Compare Republic. The unrighteous and vicious are always to be pitied in any case, and one can afford to forgive as well as pity him who is curable, and refrain and calm one's anger, not getting into a passion like a woman and nursing ill feeling. But upon him who is incapable of reformation and wholly evil, the vials of our wrath should be poured out. Wherefore I say that good men ought, when occasion demands, to be both gentle and passionate. Of all evils, the greatest is one which in the souls of most men is innate, and which a man is always excusing in himself and never correcting. I mean what is expressed in the saying that every man by nature is and ought to be his own friend, whereas the excessive love of self is in reality the source to each man of all offences. For the lover is blinded about the beloved, so that he judges wrongly of the just, the good, and the honourable, and thinks that he ought always to prefer himself to the truth. But he who would be a great man ought to regard not himself or his interests, but what is just, whether the just act be his own or that of another. Through a similar error men are induced to fancy that their own ignorance is wisdom, and thus we who may be truly said to know nothing think that we know all things. And because we will not let others act for us in what we do not know, we are compelled to act amiss ourselves. Wherefore let every man avoid excess of self-love, and condescend to follow a better man than himself, not allowing any false shame to stand in the way. There are also minor precepts which are often repeated, and are quite as useful. A man should recollect them and remind himself of them. For when a stream is flowing out, there should be water flowing in too, and recollection flows in while wisdom is departing. Therefore I say that a man should refrain from excess either of laughter or tears, and should exhort his neighbour to do the same. He should veil his immoderate sorrow or joy, and seek to behave with propriety, whether the genius of his good fortune remains with him, or whether at the crisis of his fate, when he seems to be mounting high and steep places, the gods oppose him in some of his enterprises. Still he may ever hope, in the case of good men, that whatever afflictions are to befall them in the future, God will lessen, and that present evils he will change for the better. And as to the goods which are the opposite of these evils, he will not doubt that they will be added to them, and that they will be fortunate. Such should be men's hopes, and such should be the exhortations with which they admonish one another, never losing an opportunity, but on every occasion distinctly reminding themselves and others of all these things, both in jest and earnest. Enough has now been said of divine matters, both as touching the practices which men ought to follow, and as to the sort of persons who they ought severally to be. But of human things we have not as yet spoken, and we must, for to men we are discoursing and not to gods. Pleasures and pains and desires are a part of human nature, and on them every mortal being must of necessity hang and depend with the most eager interest; and therefore we must praise the noblest life, not only as the fairest in appearance, but as being one which, if a man will only taste, and not while still in his youth desert for another, he will find to surpass also in the very thing which we all of us desire, I mean in having a greater amount of pleasure and less of pain during the whole of life. And this will be plain if a man has a true taste of them, as will be quickly and clearly seen. But what is a true taste? That we have to learn from the argument, the point being what is according to nature and what is not according to nature. One life must be compared with another, the more pleasurable with the more painful, after this manner: we desire to have pleasure, but we neither desire nor choose pain, and the neutral state we are ready to take in exchange, not for pleasure but for pain. And we also wish for less pain and greater pleasure, but less pleasure and greater pain we do not wish for, and an equal balance of either we cannot venture to assert that we should desire. And all these differ or do not differ severally in number and magnitude and intensity and equality, and in the opposites of these, when regarded as objects of choice in relation to desire. And such being the necessary order of things, we wish for that life in which there are many great and intense elements of pleasure and pain, and in which the pleasures are in excess, and do not wish for that in which the opposites exceed. Nor again do we wish for that in which the elements of either are small and few and feeble, and the pains exceed. And when, as I said before, there is a balance of pleasure and pain in life, this is to be regarded by us as the balanced life, while other lives are preferred by us because they exceed in what we like, or are rejected by us because they exceed in what we dislike. All the lives of men may be regarded by us as bound up in these, and we must also consider what sort of lives we by nature desire; and if we wish for any others, I say that we desire them only through some ignorance and inexperience of the lives which actually exist. Now what lives are they, and how many, in which, having searched out and beheld the objects of will and desire and their opposites, and making of them a law, choosing, I say, the dear and the pleasant and the best and noblest, a man may live in the happiest way possible? Let us say that the temperate life is one kind of life, and the rational another, and the courageous another, and the healthful another, and to these four let us oppose four other lives: the foolish, the cowardly, the intemperate, the diseased. He who knows the temperate life will describe it as in all things gentle, having gentle pains and gentle pleasures and placid desires, and loves not insane; whereas the intemperate life is impetuous in all things, and has violent pains and pleasures, and vehement and stinging desires, and loves utterly insane. And in the temperate life the pleasures exceed the pains, but in the intemperate life the pains exceed the pleasures in greatness and number and frequency. Hence one of the two lives is naturally and necessarily more pleasant, and the other more painful, and he who would live pleasantly cannot possibly choose to live intemperately. And if this is true, the inference clearly is, that no man is voluntarily intemperate, but that the whole multitude of men lack temperance in their lives, either from ignorance, or from want of self-control, or both. And the same holds of the diseased and healthy life. They both have pleasures and pains, but in health the pleasure exceeds the pain, and in sickness the pain exceeds the pleasure. Now our intention in choosing the lives is not that the painful should exceed, but the life in which pain is exceeded by pleasure we have determined to be the more pleasant life, and we should say that the temperate life has the elements both of pleasure and pain, fewer and smaller and less frequent than the intemperate, and the wise life than the foolish life, and the life of courage than the life of cowardice, one of each pair exceeding in pleasure and the other in pain, the courageous surpassing the cowardly, and the wise exceeding the foolish; and so that one class of lives exceeds the other class in pleasure. The temperate and courageous and wise and healthy exceed the cowardly and foolish and intemperate and diseased lives. And generally speaking, that which has any virtue, whether of body or soul, is pleasanter than the vicious life, and far superior in beauty and rectitude and excellence and reputation, and causes him who lives accordingly to be infinitely happier than the opposite. Enough of the preamble, and now the laws should follow, or, to speak more correctly, an outline of them. As then, in the case of a web or any other tissue, the warp and the woof cannot be made of the same materials (compare Statesman), but the warp is necessarily superior as being stronger and having a certain character of firmness, whereas the woof is softer and has a proper degree of elasticity. In a similar manner, those who are to hold great offices in states should be distinguished truly in each case from those who have been but slenderly proven by education. Let us suppose that there are two parts in the constitution of a state, one the creation of offices, the other the laws which are assigned to them to administer. But before all this comes the following consideration: the shepherd or herdsman, or breeder of horses, or the like, when he has received his animals, will not begin to train them until he has first purified them in a manner which befits a community of animals. He will divide the healthy and unhealthy, and the good breed and the bad breed, and will send away the unhealthy and badly bred to other herds, and tend the rest, reflecting that his labours will be vain and have no effect either on the souls or bodies of those whom nature and ill nurture have corrupted, and that they will involve in destruction the pure and healthy nature and being of every other animal, if he should neglect to purify them. Now the case of other animals is not so important; they are only worth introducing for the sake of illustration. But what relates to man is of the highest importance, and the legislator should make inquiries and indicate what is proper for each one in the way of purification and of any other procedure. Take, for example, the purification of a city. There are many kinds of purification, some easier and others more difficult, and some of them, and the best and most difficult of them, the legislator, if he be also a despot, may be able to effect. But the legislator who, not being a despot, sets up a new government and laws, even if he attempt the mildest of purgations, may think himself happy if he can complete his work. The best kind of purification is painful, like similar cures in medicine, involving righteous punishment, and inflicting death or exile in the last resort; for in this way we commonly dispose of great sinners who are incurable, and are the greatest injury of the whole state. But the milder form of purification is as follows: when men who have nothing and are in want of food show a disposition to follow their leaders in an attack on the property of the rich, these, who are the natural plague of the state, are sent away by the legislator in a friendly spirit as far as he is able, and this dismissal of them is euphemistically termed a colony. And every legislator should contrive to do this at once. Our present case, however, is peculiar, for there is no need to devise any colony or purifying separation under the circumstances in which we are placed. But as when many streams flow together from many sources, whether springs or mountain torrents, into a single lake, We ought to attend and take care that the confluent waters should be perfectly clear, and in order to effect this, should pump and draw off and divert impurities. So in every political arrangement there may be trouble and danger. But seeing that we are now only discoursing and not acting, let our selection be supposed to be completed, and the desired purity attained. Touching evil men who want to join and be citizens of our state, after we have tested them by every sort of persuasion, and for a sufficient time, we will prevent them from coming, but the good we will to the utmost of our ability receive as friends with open arms. Another piece of good fortune must not be forgotten, which, as we were saying, the Heraclid colony had, and which is also ours, that we have escaped division of land and the abolition of debts, for these are always a source of dangerous contention, and a city which is driven by necessity to legislate upon such matters can neither allow the old ways to continue, nor yet venture to alter them. We must have recourse to prayers, so to speak, and hope that a slight change may be cautiously effected in a length of time. And such a change can be accomplished by those who have abundance of land, and having also many debtors, are willing in a kindly spirit to share with those who are in want, sometimes remitting and sometimes giving, holding fast in a path of moderation, and deeming poverty to be the increase of a man's desires, and not the diminution of his property. For this is the great beginning of salvation to a state, and upon this lasting basis may be erected afterwards whatever political order is suitable under the circumstances. But if the change be based upon an unsound principle, the future administration of the country will be full of difficulties. That is a danger which, as I am saying, is escaped by us, and yet we had better say how, if we had not escaped, we might have escaped. And we may venture now to assert that no other way of escape, whether narrow or broad, can be devised but freedom from avarice and a sense of justice. Upon this rock our city shall be built. For there ought to be no disputes among citizens about property. If there are quarrels of long standing among them, no legislator of any degree of sense will proceed a step in the arrangement of the state until they are settled, but that they to whom God has given, as he has to us, to be the founders of a new state, as yet free from enmity, that they should create themselves enmities by their mode of distributing lands and houses, would be superhuman folly and wickedness. End of Book 5, Part 1.